Welcome back to Everyday Ricochet. This is episode number 6. Bobby and I are going to be discussing time traveling.
And when we say time traveling, we're talking about the things in our lives that make us think back to a better time.
Nostalgia.
Exactly. A time when it just makes you feel, your heart feels full, and it reminds you of childhood or a good time in your life, and it fills your heart and your gut with good feeling. I remember being a little girl. It was before I was in school, so I was probably 4, and my childhood was a little different because my parents were very, very young. They were teenagers when I was born, so we were kind of growing up together. But I remember my dad taking me to a plywood store. They sold lumber and plywood, and just that smell of freshly cut wood takes me back and just reminds me of a time that I spent with my father, that it was just him and me and his cousin that worked at the store, and we laughed and we played, and it just really takes me to a good place. And you know, thinking back about that plywood store, they had a lot of vanities that you could come in and buy, and it had the sink in it, but of course there wasn't any plumbing underneath in the cabinet part. And I had a little monkey doll. I guess it was Curious George. He was to me. I don't know if he was really Curious George brand, but anyway, my dad used to play tricks, and he would put the monkey in the cabinet part of that vanity, and then I would search the entire store for it, and he would tell me to look down the drain because the monkey fell down the drain. So when I see little monkeys, you know, that's what it reminds me of. I love going back to times that were pleasant. I don't want to think about the hard times. I don't want to think about, you know, how hard it is being an adult. I want to think about being a child, being innocent, having somebody else worry about all the things that life brings you.
Yeah, isn't that funny how when you're a child, you don't think of...
You have no idea.
Nothing. You don't have any worries.
The worst thing that could happen is you could fall and get a scrape, or you could step on a rusty nail, which my cousin actually did one time.
Or get lost from your parents or something like that.
Be in the department store playing in the clothes racks, and then all of a sudden you can't find your mom.
Yeah, I think we like to always step back away from adulting and think about all those times we spent as a kid or teenager not needing to worry about anything.
Right.
And nowadays, it's the work grind, kids, house,
bills,
cars,
cutting the grass, you know, making sure the kids have lunch money, which thank goodness we don't have to worry about that anymore.
Right.
Why is lunch so expensive in schools?
I don't know. I heard someone talk the other day. They were paying $5 just for breakfast, not including lunch.
That's nuts.
$20 a day to go to school to eat lunch.
Public school.
Yeah.
Free school. Anyway, thinking about school, schools, we have an antique mall here in Louisville that if you ever get to Louisville, you need to look it up. It's called Derby City Antique Mall.
It's our favorite.
It is our favorite
time.
Place to go and reminisce and look at things. And we find things that we both had as a child, and you wouldn't think, with him growing up in Chicago and me growing up in Indiana, you don't think about the cups that your grandma has in her shelves are the same cups that Mike's grandma had in his shelves.
Right.
And, you know, as a child, you're eating out of the same Tupperware bowls. You're seeing the same decorative casserole dishes. And
I think that's what is my favorite thing to do, go to that antique mall. First of all, it's an old schoolhouse, I think, right?
Yes, that's what made me think of it, is when we were talking about school.
And second of all, as we walk through there, it is filled not with just antique furniture, but anything old. And so any given time you walk into those rooms, you get something that really hits you hard.
And they change it so that you can go, and it's different than, you know, every time you go. But it just takes you back to a happy place.
Bobby and I go there, and we can spend hours walking around, and we don't generally buy a whole lot when we're there. We might find a couple of small things here and there that we can hang up or put on a shelf.
Or make a project out of.
But those things are, when we find them, it just automatically brings it back home to when you were little, and you noticed that on your aunt's countertop, or I think the last thing we purchased there were those ceramic white and red canisters that
yes,
I believe every family in the 1970s and 80s had sitting on their kitchen countertop.
And we have a table that is kind of retro. It's new, it's modern, but it's a vintage type style, and it's red and black and white and chrome. And so we're kind of looking for things that are more vintagey. And of course, you know, our kitchen is going to have Coca-Cola, everything in it, because that's one of the things that Michael loves, and it goes along with the colors in the table and chairs.
Yeah, Coca-Cola colors. The red and white.
And black. And so when we go to the mall, we're always looking for something that reminds us of the past. And so that's where the white and red canisters come in.
So why do you think that we do that? Why do you think we're always searching for the past, or we always want to go to the past? But when we were there, like I remember growing up in Tennessee, not having a lot of anything, and it being, at the time, what it felt like is a miserable part of my life. But now, 20 years later, all I want to do is get back to that place. You know, the simple side of life.
Right. The good old days.
Yes, the good old days.
Right. And that's the thing, is that every time you leave something in the past and you think about it, the farther along you go, the more distance there is between the actual happening and today. You start to forget about the bad things that happen and remember the good things.
Yeah, my uncle used to share that with me all the time. He'd say, if you let it go and leave it now, you'll eventually forget about all the bad things that have happened and only remember the good.
And sometimes that's not great, but you know, it will always be the good old days. You know, one of the things I think is fun is taking our children or our grandchildren with us when we go, and they don't know what some of the things from our childhood, what they are or what they do. Just simple objects like kitchen utensils and all. And it's so funny that the way that life has changed so much from the 70s and 80s.
Just the colors. I know, taking our daughters or the grandkids, as you can tell, Bobby and I, we do a lot of antique shopping.
We do a lot of antique window shopping.
Mostly window shopping. But it's so funny to me when we take the kids and we show them this. I mean, we'll pick something up and it'll be a color and they'll be like, ugh.
Yeah.
Just like we would do if it was the plastic on the couch or the green rug or what have you.
Right.
Shag green rug.
Exactly. The olive green and the golden wheat color. Yeah. And, you know, at the time, that's just what it was.
Right.
You thought your house was fancy if you had a colored refrigerator in there instead of just a white one.
Right.
But today you look back and you're like, who in the world thought that those colors were good? Appetizing.
And I wonder if when our grandkids grow up or our nieces grow up and they think about, man, Uncle Mikey and Aunt Bobby had that color refrigerator?
Yeah.
Or
why in the world do they have a black refrigerator?
Yeah. Or stainless steel? Who had stainless
steel? Why
steel?
wouldn't you have a pink one?
Right.
You know, why wouldn't you have a little color in your life?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what they're thinking nowadays, but I remember thinking about looking at some of those old things in those stores, and just automatically takes you back to a simpler time in life.
Mm-hmm.
So I wonder if later on, if the kids will see that, if they'll think back, that was a simple part of life.
It's funny that you say that, because when I think about the future and looking back, I wonder, will they look at certain computers and certain like MP3 players and iPhones? Will those be nostalgic to them because it will have changed so much in the future?
Well, think about Brianna. We thought it was humongous when we were buying her first laptop. It had the DVD drive in it,
mm-hmm.
you know, where you can put CDs in it. Now, people just a little bit younger than her
mm-hmm.
don't even know what CDs are.
Right.
I mean, think about us trying to
or
teach
VHS
the girls.
VHS tapes? I mean, I remember the girls had their own TV with the little VCR on it, and they had tons of VCH tapes with their favorite movies and shows on it. Now, if you take kids that are 10, 11 years old today, they probably never had those. They probably didn't see them.
Yeah, 14 or 15 years old, they probably haven't seen those.
I mean,
of course, now technology is moving so quickly now that, yes, I mean, they wouldn't know. Carter and Reese, or even Emma for that matter, would not know really what a VHS tape was, right? They just...
Or a Walkman.
Or, yes.
It's kind of like us with 8-tracks. I mean, they were out when we were kids, but it was moving towards the cassette tape. So you didn't really use the 8-track tapes.
And things progress did I say that? Things progress a whole lot quicker today than they did back then?
Yes.
I mean, my dad had a CB radio in his 1968 AMX, you know, and he would talk to people down the street, his buddies down the street, and Jimmy and I thought that was the biggest, most coolest thing you could talk to somebody down the street.
Without using the phone.
Yeah, without using that thing in the kitchen.
Yeah, and you could take it with you.
Now, my son-in-law is saying, hey, walkie-talkie me on the iPhone. I mean, on the iWatch.
Yeah.
And I do. And even that takes me back, like, we are using such old technology to play around with a watch that he's 50 miles away from me, 100 miles away, and I'm doing a walkie-talkie on the iWatch.
Well, what about FaceTime and Skype? What in the world? Well, I remember when I was a kid and people would joke about someday in the future you're going to have a phone where you can actually see the person.
I remember Uncle Jerry, when FaceTime came out, he didn't want any part of it. It was like, no way. And then once we started, you know, of course we used it quite a bit. That's all we used. You know, he'd get on that iPad and he'd start calling us on FaceTime. And
he got to see the girls grow up that way.
That's the way.
Because he lived in Chicago and we lived in Indiana or Kentucky. So that was his way of keeping up with our kids.
That's how he watched the girls grow up.
Yeah.
Yep, and just kept in time with everything. Now, we still use that, but it's now, for Bobby and I, we use that for everything. When I travel, someone asked me the other day, how is traveling affecting your life? And I said, honestly, it doesn't affect my life. It is, I talk to you more now when I'm traveling than when I did when I was at home here just working locally. Because of FaceTime and text message and the regular phone, which we don't usually use the phone that much.
No, not really.
We're just using FaceTime and text messaging. And it almost seems like we're not apart from one another. It really does. I know.
I think the constant conversation that we have, the constant contact that you and I have, I think it helps our relationship. Even when we're apart, because we can talk to each other all the time. We always have something that we want to tell each other. So I think that part of it is good. I laugh sometimes because I think if people read this, if they read our text messages, they would think that we were newlyweds.
Yeah.
Because we say, you know, we always say, I love you.
And it's not just once. It's like after every other text.
Right. And you know, someday that's going to be nostalgic. Wouldn't it be cool if, 50 years from now, somebody would find that phone and those text messages and say, oh my gosh, look how much these people loved each other.
Yeah, no. No, I'm sure they will. I think there'll be a way that you can track the messages. I don't think right now, but
but
that's why those letters are so important. Like when my dad was in the Army, he wrote home.
And they kept the letters.
Yeah, my dad still has a shoebox full of those letters that he wrote his mother while he was in the Army in 68 and 69.
I hope that we don't lose that. I hope there's still a way to get back to our time when we have great-grandchildren and they're learning about their history. I hope that there's a way for them to just open those letters.
Well, it frustrates me because of modern technology. I love it. But then remember what I said to you every time I traveled? And I did it one time. I wrote a letter to you. I thought it would be cool for every